Welcome back to another episode of Keeping Current with Kansas City. This is Thad Bell from the Kansas City Soccer Journal, and with me on the other side of this Zoom is a very tired Daniel Sperry from the KC Star. How are you, sir?
Well, you put very tired in there for me, so I didn't have to say anything about it. But yeah, it's been a long week. I was gone. As nice as some of my pictures on social media might have looked about being in Florida, yes, it was nice and warm. I was working the whole time, pulling long days. So yeah, I think to give you a brief idea, the I like I was picked up from my house on January 7th at 5 a.m. And then we did not get to, I was awake and working, sorry, until 9 p.m. So quite on travel, sit down, get to Orlando immediately working. So, and then of course, the Alan Pulido news decided to break that night. So, really grand, wonderful timing in the middle of all of it. But I say this like it was a good time, a good trip. I'm exhausted, but I'm glad I had the day or two here to gather myself after I've been back and kind of immerse myself back into what I can of the KC soccer scene that I tried to do while I was gone, but didn't
Yep.
get to
I was
as
trying to
much as
get him
I'd
to
hoped.
pod. I was trying to get him to
Yeah.
pod yesterday, and he's like, "No, no, man, I got to spend time with my family." I'm like, "Come on, that's
Yeah, I know.
overrated."
Gosh, right. Yeah, my daughter cried when she hugged me. She was so happy to see me after
Yeah.
being gone for a week. So,
You hate
precious
that she's
moments and
crying, but
things.
it's also a great feeling.
It's also a great feeling because
Yep.
you hate to have been gone for that long, but in reality, she got some cool trinkets from Disney Springs out of it. So,
Cool. All right. Well, let's since we last spoke, there has been a little bit of news, some signings, preseason roster. So let's just kind of dive in there and talk about the roster line by line, the differences and some of the what we expect. Cool.
yeah.
So the preseason roster came out this week from the KC Current. Goalkeepers listed were Lorena, not yet reported, Laurel Ivory, Claire Gagne, and Evan Osteen. Claire Gagne is one of the three young players they just recently signed.
Mhm.
Evan Osteen is a non-roster invitee.
And a U18 one at that.
Yes, and I've seen some clips of her. I've seen her play. Not that I knew that she was going to be coming here, but she's a pretty good keeper for a 17-year-old, I believe. Lorena is not yet reported, and I think for the same reason that Bia is not yet reported because of visa issues. So I asked specifically about Bia. I did not ask about Lorena, but specifically visa issues are just getting that stuff straightened out.
Yeah.
What what is there to talk about this keeper group? Because we've already talked about Lorena and Laurel, Claire
Yeah.
Gagne.
Um, you know, uh, for Claire Gagne's the interesting one, um, to me. She had a decent career at Brown, but ended up going to UNC and was lights out at UNC. Um, I think there was a very high um, level that she was able to produce, especially in the tournament. I do think it's interesting bringing like the third goalkeeper. You usually want to be a developmental type of player,
Yep.
and I think you have Laurel Ivory who. Vlaco talked about it yesterday, just the ability, like she has shown that she has the ability to put up some really good games and has done so against the current, as an NWSL experienced veteran. And I think with a better team in front of her, probably would have had a better year. And Seattle Rain was not very good at all in any way, shape, or form. So I think that's like, like looking at her, we've talked about Lorena, we've talked about Laurel. I think in general with Claire Gagne in there, it makes total sense to do this. The Evan Osteen thing feels very much kind of like how they invited Mary Long last year. Maybe not ready. Like you're not in the NWSL with only a 26 player roster, unless they're upping this to 30 player roster, like an active roster. You're not thinking about signing these players
Yeah.
unless you're going to sign them and loan them somewhere else, which is the USL exists for that reason. But you can't do that with the under 18
No.
signings either, can you?
Nope.
So I think that that's the other part there is that like if you sign her, then are you going to loan Claire Gagne? I don't see Osteen getting signed now. Does she get signed in the next year? Maybe when she's not 18 anymore, or maybe something happens and they need another goalkeeper. Do they eventually pull the trigger and do it? You could see it. So I think it'll be, um, I'm interested in general just to see like what they do with her in this role there, being a part of the team. But I'll say this, like, it's cool to see them giving young players a shot in the role.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like it, and I really like Osteen from what I remember seeing her play and going back and watching a little bit of highlights. Again, it's probably not going to happen this year. I do wish they would extend the roster so that some of these players could be signed now and they could develop in a professional atmosphere, but that's not my choice.
Nope.
On the defenders list, Alana
Hmm.
Cook, Kayla Sharples, Haley Mace, Gabrielle Robinson, season an injury list still, Izzy Rodriguez, Reagan Steigletter, Mallory Weber is back as a non-roster invitee, Ellie Wheeler, Katie Scott is one of the young players that they signed that I don't think we got a chance to talk about before, and a non-roster invitee of Melia Brewer. I'll just
Mila
Mila.
Brewer.
Okay,
Mila.
you
Yeah,
know I'm terrible with names.
the I comes before the L. So I would say it's either Mila or Mila. So
Yeah, I'm
or
gonna say
Mela.
Brewer,
Who knows? But
and
anyways, yeah.
she's if that's who I think it is a very good local Kansas City player.
Yep,
Uh,
she's been involved in under 16 and
yes,
under 17 national team for a while. She's still relatively young. I don't know that she's even 15 or 16 yet. From what
yeah,
I've asked around about her, she's been but she's one like Mary Long. She's been around the team, being a local
yeah,
player. She's been around the team through the summer last year. She has trained with the team before, so like this is one that I mean, next year she could be a U18 signing. Like she's still probably got multiple years where she would qualify under
yeah.
that. So I think, given her profile within the U.S. Youth National Team setup and her local ability, it only makes sense for them to bring her in and see what they can do. Obviously, and I say this, obviously they could sign her. Like it's entirely conceivable that they could sign her.
It is.
And I find that one to be more likely of this non-roster invite under 18 type of player to be one that gets signed in the long run. I'm not saying they have, and this is not me trying to sugarcoat or twist any inside knowledge I have. I could just see it happening because she's a very highly touted prospect. She's been a player that's been around this organization already for at least a calendar year. And so there's some intrigue there. But I'm excited to see what Katie Scott does too. Katie Scott was a very good defender for the under 17 national team. She was good at Penn State. Another kind of fullback in that mold that Ellie Wheeler can bring. We know Ellie can play left, right. She can play on the wing. Just kind of a utility knife kind of a player, and it'll be interesting to see a player like Katie Scott in there. Haley Mace can kind of play in that center back mold or the fullback that pinches in and plays like a third center back if they build out of the back with three. So that frees up a player like a Katie Scott to maybe be one of those more bombarding type of fullbacks. If they choose to flip the system, they can play Haley on the left and have her pinch in that way, shift the other two center backs over. You play the back three, and the right back is pushing up high and creating the overload on that side of the field versus the left back how they were doing it last year. So the there's flexibility that she brings. She's a solid player. Has a good rating to her level in terms of like what people thought of her with the U17 national team, what she was able to do at Penn State. So I'm interested to see how like those two kind of fit into this. Like does Katie Scott push for playing time in the way that Ellie Wheeler and Claire Hutton did last year? Or is she kind of going to be even behind a Steigletter kind of a player in the pecking order? That'll be interesting to see. But I would not. Again, I would not be surprised if we see Mila Brewer signed at some point in the next calendar year. And I mean truly until like next January. I wouldn't be surprised within the calendar year if she's ends up as a U18 sign for the current. And if not the current, I won't be shocked if another NWSL team tries to snap her up either.
Would not either. I've heard some really positive things about her from local coaches. I've actually seen her play, I think maybe twice, not a lot. And I didn't know who she was. I just knew that she was on the younger side of the group I saw her playing with.
Mhm.
And yeah, I've seen her out at training a lot, so I would not be surprised. Back to Scott for a second. I know they see her as an outside back, but she also has played outside mid and as a wing. And if I remember correctly, she's the only person who scored on Claire Gagne in the NCAA tournament.
She is. Look at you.
So I just
Deep
found that
knowledge.
interesting.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
No, it's just reading. I gotta admit, I asked
Sure.
about the players that were on season-ending injury, for example, Gabby and Alex, and I just got they're progressing well. So not a lot of detail on when they would be actually available, but I know from previously it's still going to be a while.
Yeah. Just going back to Evan Osteen, reminder she won the Golden Gloves at the U17 Women's World Cup.
Yeah,
So we're talking a very highly rated young goalkeeper prospect at 16, 17 years old. She's listed at 5'10", which is at least 5 to 6 inches. I'm not 6 inches taller than me, but she's at least 4 or 5 inches taller than me.
yeah,
Which
and
tall goalkeepers were good.
she was getting time when I was hoping that Molly Vapinski would get time because I've seen her play. So it's not that I have a preference, but just sometimes I like to see the players I've seen.
Yep.
And so she was getting time over Molly, who was also a very highly rated player. Anything else on the defenders? I think we know what we
Well,
got on most of them.
yeah, I'm really interested in the long run. We can talk about more after what we're looking to see from this team the next year, but just to see Alana Cook and Kayla Sharples have a full preseason to make that center back duo like really gel, because I thought they were really, really good in a very quick, abbreviated on-ramp last year.
Yep.
But to see them get more systematic, more detailed instruction and see them work closer together will be really interesting to me, and to eventually see the progression of Gabrielle Robinson back into the fold from her ACL injury. I cannot rate her high enough. And in reality, I think a back line of her and Alana might be the best back line that they could possibly put out. But you may not be able to see that until like August or July
Yeah.
at its in its best form. So all three of them, I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of connection that they really build, especially even tying it back to the rest of the back line with Lorena as well.
Uh, Going to the midfield now because I want to come back to kind of wrap up what you were just talking about, but a little bit differently. Midfielders: Dabinia, Vanessa DiBernardo, Bailey Feist, Claire Hutton, Lola Bonta, Jericho, Rocky Rodriguez. Claire should be up with the Futures camp now. She was only here because of the move from California. So she was
Yes.
at the presser, but the only reason she was there is because they moved the whole camp from California to Florida. The only new player in that group is Rocky Rodriguez. We've talked about her before. She seemed to talk about herself more as a midfielder. I know you've seen her, kind of saw her as a forward at times, but we both know she can do that. So I don't think there was really a lot to talk about the midfielders.
Yeah, not really. I thought, initial impressions of Rocky right away were really well spoken, smart player. I think she, like culturally, you can already tell she's going to be, I think she'll be a good fit into the locker room. Um, and I think there's something to be said for, the way she sees herself, the way what she said was that she sees herself as a player that bridges the lines between the midfield and the forward, which in a way a second striker does, in the way that a true attacking number 10 player does if they have that defensive responsibility kind of stripped from them with having two defensive like holding mids below her. So I'm curious to see like how she fits in because at times, I thought Vanessa DiBernardo played the 8 and the 10 really well. And I just don't see Rocky as an 8 necessarily. So I'm curious to see how she's utilized, how they play her, and what she kind of brings into being able to kind of link the attack, like she says, she feels is her strong suit. But first impressions of her were really good, and I think she'll be a really good fit into the group.
Yeah, being in the room, I don't know how much of it showed up on the video, but just being in the room, you could see the already the chemistry with her and Lo especially.
Yeah.
Lo has chemistry with everybody that she likes,
Yes.
and I caveat that with everybody she likes. Um,
Hmm.
but you could already see that really well, and Lo like telling her she had to sit in the middle because she was in between her and Ellie.
Hmm.
It was a good glimpse into them already having that relationship.
Yeah.
Uh, I just don't know where Jericho's going to get much time, but everybody else is really going to be battling for some time there in the midfield.
Yeah. The one thing looking at this group in general, I think they're missing a true defensive mind to it. And I think that's the one thing I'm really looking to see them bring in through the rest of this window. Flacco kind of hinted that, there probably are still some deals that are out there to be made. They want to get into camp and see what they need. But one thing that Vlaco mentioned was that they wanted a defensive-minded midfielder to be able to bring in and help close out games and kind of be a more pure defensive midfielder. And they never added that player. So that player to me is still a player that's needed. I don't see it on the roster in any of the invites, and I don't see it in any of the players that they have signed at the moment. So I think that's like one area. If I'm looking at like any of these groups so far, that's like the most incomplete group, and it's simply because they don't have that like purely defensive midfield person. Because I think in general they're very well rounded from the 8-10 and being able to play kind of in that dual pivot type of a six that they will employ at times. But to have the true defensive minded midfield, the enforcer, the closer kind of a player, it's not there yet. So that's where I think I'm looking at that group. I think it still needs a little bit more to it.
With the players not being able to get them all onto the field at one time, I think you're going to see some of those players fill that role as coming on as the extra defensive help or as the extra attacker because I think like Rocky can do both. I mean, we know
Yeah.
how good she is. I just don't know if that at her point in time, because I know we've looked at some of the past. I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but she's not always getting a ton of playing time.
Mhm.
That may change here, but that's also a player that can come in and fill your last 20, 30 minutes of a game to close it out because she's got the intelligence and the smarts and the ability to do that. But she's also got the ability to turn it and go forward. So, uh, and we know that Lowe has kind of played in that role. Claire can be a pure six at some point. She's just not doesn't have the full experience on that.
Yeah.
Forwards, Timois, Michelle Cooper, who is also up with the futures camp right now. Pfeiffer, who's also on season end injury, we mentioned earlier. Nichelle Prince, Bia, who's not in camp yet. Mary Long, that name sounds familiar. And a non-wrestler invitee, Ava Tankersley from Arkansas, I believe.
Mhm.
Uh, just I'm going to go backwards along this line. Ava, good scorer for Arkansas. I think 12 goals, 9 assists in her senior season or her last season. I don't know if it was senior season, but her last season.
Yeah. She had 38 goals in a little over 100 games in her career in the SEC. Tall forward, 5'11". So I'm interested to see what she can bring. Obviously, probably not going to see anything from these games, and we'll have to see what we see probably by opening day or whatever we can see if we ever get an open training session.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
Yeah.
to a truly open training session that's not just a bunch of ball work. And so if that happens, maybe we see what she can bring and if she's going to be kind of a player that might fit into the squad, but a decent, she has a decent SEC track record. The non-roster invite collegiate kind of thing is interesting. It seems like the kind of player that, you pick in the later rounds of a draft. right? Like you have the kind of players that it's like a fourth round pick. Are they going to come in? Are they going to end up with a contract or not? Maybe, maybe not. Play their way into one, but the pedigree is interesting. The amount of assists there that you note is really interesting too, for her as a forward as well. So,
Yeah, she's a very well-rounded forward. I can't say that I've seen her play, so I probably have watched her play in a game, and I just don't really remember her standing out at that point. But I just put games up on the screen and watch it sometimes.
mhm.
Uh, but just looking at her record, and I believe Arkansas had the most points per game too in the entire country. So it, that just bodes well for her at least having a chance. But it's also a pretty stacked forward line, so I could see her also being one of emergency call up type player or something like that at some point.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, we know Timois, we know Cooper, we know Pfeiffer, we know Nichelle, we know Bia, Mary Long. We didn't get a chance to talk about, I don't think, before this pod. Um, we She's been practicing with the team off and on for a couple years now. She's been called up to, the national team, youth teams, and scored some goals there. She scored a couple at Duke, when she was available.
Hmm.
So seen a lot of people complain about her being on the team because her last name, but at the same time, if they didn't sign her, somebody else probably would have.
Yeah. And also like some of the complaints that were either sent to me or I had heard of were, people kind of complaining about like the fact that, oh, she only had like a little bit of time at Duke, and I'm like, okay, well that makes the fact that she had like the contributions that she had were in minimal amount of time, I think is kind of even more impressive, right? Like
Yeah,
we're talking about a freshman coming out, a true freshman, an underaged freshman coming off the bench, and 'cause she went and enrolled at Duke early, and reclassified herself to a year earlier, so like we're looking at a player that like she ended up at the U17 World Cup. She started, she scored goals, she made assists, played well. Like I don't I understand, like I can hear the criticism for nepotism and, like that in general. I'm not saying it's 100% truthful in this case, but at least like there's some legs to like being like, okay, look, it's the owner's daughter. Like there's maybe a hint of it. I could understand seeing and hearing that. However, like if you were to remove the last name and say a player named Mary who came on and scored and assisted what she did in the limited amount of minutes that she did at Duke, and when she was finally available for Duke, Duke finally started having a good season, um, and played and started and was a very good player for the U17 women's national team during the World Cup. That player was signed by the Kansas City Current. If you remove the last name, you look at it and you say, and you hear that she's been training with the team and looking competent in training with the team for at least a calendar year, if not a year and a half. You look at that and you say, okay, cool, interesting young signing for the future. But because her last name is what it is, it kind of exudes this like, oh, well, why should she be given a chance over someone else? But the truth is, if the current didn't sign her, she would have signed somewhere else. And
at least a
I'm
very
not,
good chance of it. I'm not
yeah,
100% certain, but
yeah.
a very
I
good
mean,
chance of it.
I had a conversation with Chris Long, about it, kind of, in advance to go along with the release of the signing. And in our conversation, they wanted that he made it very clear that he wanted the choice to be in Mary's court, and what Mary decided was what she wanted. She wanted to be around the team. She wanted to play here. She wanted to take that opportunity here. But there were other opportunities. It was very clear there were other NWSL teams that were and USL teams that were interested. There were international teams that were interested. So like there was not like I won't say that there was a bidding war, but like this wasn't just like, oh, the Kansas City Current are the only team interested in this player, and that is the 100% false. Um, so like this is a player that on paper has the pedigree that you would expect of one of these kind of signings.
Right.
And so like, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. And I'm interested to see what she does. Um, in reality, personally, I rate Alex Pfeiffer higher than I rate Mary Long. I think she's further along in her development and is a like has a greater chance of like when healthy, like impacting the team. We saw very quickly in the moments that she was on the field, her hunger to go to goal. She seemed like she really got polished towards the end of the year, and unfortunately got that injury against Houston. Um, which eventually ended up being in a torn ACL for her, and we didn't get to see her at the U17 World Cup. But Fife's a really good player,
Yeah,
and so I'm not saying that this is one of those things like Mary Long might be a player that actually gets time in 2, 3 years time, you know? And so I think we gotta just temper and chill the general frustrations because
yeah.
I could hear it if the pedigree wasn't there, but the pedigree's there.
Yeah, and I think, well, I mean, I'm pretty sure we'll see her at some point this year. Just, it might not be a lot of time, but I'm pretty sure we'll see her
Correct.
at some point.
I had zero idea that they would even give Pfeiffer a shot on the field, and she got like 40 minutes in the first game and scored a goal.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, crap.
Yeah.
Okay." Like, hello.
I know they were a little shorthanded at that point, but yes. And then she didn't get a lot of playing time, and then she started to get more playing time, and that's when she got hurt. But I'm with you. If it was a choice of starting a healthy Pfeiffer or a healthy Mary Long, it would probably be Pfeiffer at this point. But let's see how she does. You and I have both seen Mary Long in training for the last couple years. She held her own with the adults, and I say held her own. She looked good. She, made mistakes sometimes, just like every other single player. She's got the ability to play, and yes, her last name is Long. Yes, she had every financial advantage in order to be a good player, but in the end, I don't really give a shit about that because I want a good player. If
Yep.
if I want this team to be good, and I know I'm not supposed to technically root for teams, but if I want this team to be good, I want them to get the best players they can. I don't care where they come from, whether it's a poor village in a South American country or a highly overcompensated, you know, family in a large city, whatever. You know what I'm trying to go with that. I don't care. Get the best one. So yes, nepotism. Don't give a shit. Quite honestly.
Yeah.
All right, two names not on this list. So I asked about it specifically.
Yeah, you got a really interesting response about that.
Yes, I did. Ball and Hamilton are neither one of them are on the list. I asked about it. They said that they are having talks with them. I asked very specifically back, "Are you wanting to sign them?" They said, "We are having talks with them to sign them." I forget the exact phrasing, but yes, they want them back.
Mhm.
My understanding, and I'm going to very delicately walk across this, I think, hopefully, is that I I have a very high confidence they will be back with the Kansas City Current this year, but maybe not right away. There's something else. I don't understand the whole situation, so I would feel very uncomfortable talking about any of it. So
Yeah.
I feel very confident that when they're ready to come back, it's not a bad thing or anything like this. So don't people like freak out. There's something else going on and I don't fully understand it, so I don't want to talk about it. But I feel like they will be back probably early in the season.
Yep. That's all I have to add to it. From everything I gather, you're 100% correct. I expect to see them at some point um, in 2025.
5.
Gosh, I can't believe it's 2025. Yeah, I'd be shocked if they weren't. Um, I think there's some other things at play here. And again, like you said, not bad. Just kind of some delicate timings of certain things, and
Yeah.
I every indication I've gotten from anyone and everyone that knows about what's going on is that they will be back. So I have no choice to believe other than the fact that they will be back. So I won't be don't be surprised if down the road you see them. and don't and it's one of those things too. Like even with Mallory Weber, like the team made those posts where they were like, "Oh, goodbye,"
Yes.
Alma Schultz, goodbye this player. They never said goodbye to any of those players.
Right.
Well, I don't know whether or not they will bring Mallory Weber back. Obviously, they'll see what she's got. In general, we know what she has when she's healthy, but at this point, she's essentially been away from the game for like 2 years, practically. And in total,
Most
in
of
that
three, right?
most of three in reality, and has played a total of 10 minutes in any of them. So, it's a really hard thing with Mal, but she is a very good player and is a player that's really well liked and loved within this group. So I understand the non-roster invite for her, and two, I'd be curious to see what happens there. I think you remember last year, was it Brittany Eisenhower, that the team signed or didn't sign, but had brought in as a non-roster invite goalkeeper and ended up retiring like
Yeah.
2 weeks in. I'm not saying Mal's going to do that, but like it's a non-roster invite. Anything can happen at this point.
She
And
has a
so
chance to win a spot if she's physically capable of doing it and wants to do it. I'm pretty
correct.
sure.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see for her, but like it's kind of the same boat. Now her, Hammy, Ball were never quote unquote said goodbye to. So like
Yeah. So
I think like we can all read between the lines and be educated adults here and say like there is a chance, a very good chance that they end up coming back here. And so with Ball and Hammy, um, I will be floored if I don't see them on a roster at some point, a Kansas
yeah,
City current roster
yeah.
at some point in the year
I
2025.
would not put your Ball and Hamilton jerseys into a storage bin.
Correct.
All right. Uh, we only got like 4 or 5 minutes left before we have to break, but I just want to go back. Uh, a lot of what Vlaco talked about in the presser was they will now be able to build upon the foundation they had last year and add layers to it. You asked about it. I know I talked to him on a little bit different time about some similar stuff. They're going to build foundation upon the foundation they had last year because obviously they were a really good team last year. A little bit of a break here, a little bit of break there. They would have been in a final, and they were a very good team. My only concern about that is they still have a lot of change, especially the back line. So that connection between the goalies, excuse me, they have a lot of change in the goalies.
Mhm,
The back line came in the middle of the season, so they were still building that foundation because you can only build so much during the regular season.
mhm.
You want some that preseason to build that stuff together. So that's just my only concern about that is that some of those players are going to have to start from scratch and build upon it, while some of them will already have that there. So what do you think?
But I don't think that's any different than any other like off season that
No,
turn over players too. And I think like looking at it, like I understand what Vlaco said and talking about how like, okay, our defensive principles, we've learned how we want to play in the mid block. How do we add the nuances and the layers to what we do in certain situations? And especially in a season where they had the injuries that they kind of did and the change that they did around the season, with Bia in and out, Dabini in and out, and Cooper was in and out at times for injury, and the whole back line practically changing over at certain points in the season. You have a whole brand new goalkeeper in there, like. They did all of that and still had like the majority of those principles there. And I don't think, some of the things that he's talking about in that are not like goalkeeper specific, right? Like
right.
the goalkeeper in reality, Schultz jumped in and was the best. I mean, statistically, was the best goalkeeper in the league during the time that she was playing. The numbers back it up. So, like, when you look at that, I think that that is a little bit more seamless than it maybe looks and feels when you replace an entire goalkeeper room. Yes, there will be an adjustment period for Lorena, but and the back line, but I also don't think like at this point too, they're not bringing in a player that they don't know is going to fit exactly what they're wanting to do there too. So I'll be curious to see like these layers and the fine tuning because I think both of us can attest there was a lot of really good things that happened and Temwa papered over a lot of build up cracks because they were able to just get her the ball and she does amazing things. Um, but I'm curious to see, Vlatko in the press conference talked a lot about what they do when they don't have the ball. I'm more interested to see the layers that they add when they have the ball, because I think that if they can make themselves a more well-rounded offensive threat, the back line showed that it was much better. Lorraine is a very good shot stopper. We'll see that in there. I'm looking forward to seeing like how do you get it so it's not just Temwa, because I understand, yes, they set a record for the most individual goal scorers ever in an NWSL season, but Temwa carried it a lot on her shoulders,
Oh,
especially through the stretch, and I'm curious to see if they can get away from that and really open things back up.
but we also saw how different it was when Bia was in the lineup. Uh,
Correct.
so having Bia in there made a huge difference. It wasn't just Timwa. When Bia was gone, it became pretty much throw the ball up to Timwa. So that was
Correct.
can they get somebody else filling that role a little bit better or building it out of the midfield? Again, I also felt like when Vanessa was farther forward, that wasn't as much of an issue. So, all right, man. I appreciate the time. We're gonna run out here in just a second, so I might as well actually,
Yeah.
end it gracefully.
Well, we could wrap it up. We could
Uh,
wrap it up not with like knives at each other's throats or something like that, but that never happens, to be honest. So we're good.
no, I mean, sometimes we disagree, but you're one of the people that I respect when I disagree. So
I appreciate that. Same to you, my friend. It's great to pod. We look forward to many more of them as the season goes on.
yeah,
Thanks for listening, friends.
it's still early, and we are out.